One of my friends, Madiam, calls me one day and she says, my son got beat up on the playground and we came here for safety and I'm so scared and will you pray for me? So she calls me back just an hour later and said, Jeannie, God heard you. He answered your prayers. The principal fixed everything. I didn't even have to talk to him. I feel safe. How do you have this connection to God? I said, I can tell you, but it's kind of a secret and it will take 6 times meeting with you in your home.
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Well, greetings and welcome to this edition of the Mission Matters podcast. My name is Ted Essler and I'm going to be your host. I'm president of Missio Nexus, and I usually do these, as you know if you're a listener, with Matthew Ellison, and he almost always says that he likes to swing swords and do all these things. Well, today he's not swinging any swords. He's home, not feeling great. And so we're moving ahead, and we're going to miss Matthew, but I'm sure he'll be back for the next episode of The Mission Matters. Well, today I'm thrilled to have I think what's going to be a fun and interesting guest. Jeannie Marie is the author of Across the Street and Around the World, and she's the founder of Neighbors and Nations. And she's also part of another organization, another movement, but we're going to keep that part kind of clandestine, and we won't mention who that is, but she's a strategist with them. And they work in many, many countries, Muslim countries around the world. She's a perspectives teacher and also teaches at Justice College. She's a practitioner and mobilizer, having befriended many international students, welcomed refugees, and worked with community development nonprofits. Moved to India with her family, and she was there working with an unreached, unengaged people group. She now lives in Arizona, her husband and 4 children, and we're going to kind of jump right into it here. Jeannie, with that kind of a background, it strikes me that you're just cross-culturally wired, and you were going to do diaspora ministry regardless of which path your career took. Tell us just a little bit about what the transition was like from working cross-culturally on site to being in Arizona and working with diaspora peoples.
Well, actually, it was the other way around, Ted.
Oh.
I grew up overseas. I was 18 when I moved to the U.S., so I was cross-cultural from the beginning, right? But I thought I had to live in a tribe to work cross-culturally. And so I didn't actually do much cross-culturally till I was about 38 years old. So I, worked in the corporate world. I had kids. We had a small group, did all that kind of stuff. But then I saw that there were Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists coming in as refugees. So I was 38 years old when I met my first Muslim right across the street. Well, actually about an hour away from my white picket fence suburban backyard. And so got super involved with refugees and international students. And then we moved overseas. And then we moved back. So yeah.
Interesting. So were you an MK overseas?
Yes. My parents were with New Tribes, now Ethnos 360.
Yeah.
So translating the Bible in a language that had never been written. Yeah.
Okay, so that I'm guessing that was kind of a traditional missionary approach, and now you're doing something that's fairly non-traditional.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about diaspora. What do we mean when we use that word diaspora?
Well, let's really start with the foundation that there are 3 billion people with least access to Jesus, right? We know this. Your audience knows this. They're mostly Hindu and Muslim, but also Buddhist, formerly communist countries. So those 3 billion are actually, some of them are moving to a street, an office, a city near you if you're not in one of those countries, right? So that's with my Jeannie Marie hat on, is that this is the diaspora from the nations are actually moving out of their homeland and coming into where we live. So I guess the definition would be the dispersion or spread of a people from their homeland. So they're leaving their homeland and they're coming to live somewhere else. So yeah, another way to look at it, I have my two hats. So my strategist hat says, these are the people, the diaspora are the people that are coming from hard to reach, hard to live in places, and they're moving to, quote, easier to reach or easier to live in places. So, yeah. I mean, some missional strategists are saying that only 1% of the population of these least reached people groups actually live in the diaspora, right? Settling outside of their homeland. But that's
1% of the diaspora? Or are you saying 1%? What do you mean by that statistic?
Yeah, 1% of the 3 billion.
Okay, gotcha.
And actually, it might even be 1% of the 2 billion. We're talking about frontier people groups now, right? In missions languages, where it's the people groups that are less than 0.1%. Yeah. But I'll just stick with the 3 billion, the people that have less than 2%, so the unreached people groups. Only about 1% of them are moving out of the homeland.
Yeah, any listeners to this podcast for a length of time will know that I often push back a little bit on diaspora, missiology, in the sense that it represents, I think the number right now is about 3.1 of the world's population, or 238 million people, live outside of their birth country. And that makes it difficult for us to envision reaching unreached people groups if we just did diaspora ministry. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I'm all about sending people to the nations, to the places, peoples and places that are least reach, right? In my day job. And I do think it's absolutely strategic to engage the diaspora as well. So for a couple of reasons. One is, 1% of 3 billion, that's 30 million. So that's even less than your number that you put out, but it's still a lot of people. So it's like, I was just in Norway, and that's 3 Norways, the population of 3 Norways, right? Or Venezuela, Nepal, Malaysia, they have about 30 million. So just think about it. It's like a whole country, right? But also strategically, it's also important with my Jeannie Marie hat on and Matthew Ellison, we talk to churches all the time. It's good for believers like us that there are diaspora, because when we're mobilizing the church here in America or in Western countries, it means that every believer can likely make a friend from that 3 billion Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist. So it helps us mobilize people to put a face of these people in front of them, because we all know the people we're trying to mobilize, we're trying to first get them to care, right, about the nations, about unreached people groups. And if they can make a friend, they're coming here. So people, and then the second thing is that people wanting to reach the nations, they can't move for some reason or another, or they won't move. They actually can be on the front line. So even if they can't or don't want to move to a faraway place, here they have an opportunity to actually be on the front line.
Yeah.
And that's compelling, because we want to be active. We don't want to just give and pray, not just. We all do that. But yeah.
So, there's so many missiological things to talk about here. One of the things that I've noticed is that people that tend to work more in the missions world, like you and I, when we think about reaching the diaspora people, we see ourselves as going into their communities. But I've noticed that with many local churches, they're using an attractional model. For example, let's run ESL in our basement on Thursday nights and get them into our building. Just curious, what kind of model are you promoting as you're going about the encouragement of diaspora ministry?
Such a good question. I would say I'm like the Bob Goff of the missions world, where I'm strategic and intentional underneath, but outside I'm like, simple and, doing simple things for simple people. But no, I just yesterday recorded an hour-long free video training of 3 paradigm shifts that I'm helping churches think how to do this different. And one of them is that we tend to try to invite people into our churches, and no, we need to go to them. We need to pretend that we're overseas workers right here, and we need to go be where they are, and all the reasons why we shouldn't bring them into our world. So I'm saying it in a different way for people that, aren't missions oriented, but I'm definitely preaching that message. So you'll be happy to know that.
Well, yeah, that makes me happy, because I mean, that's when you do kind of incarnational going ministry, obviously you see how that is so helpful to try to plant the gospel inside a different cultural context. I got to ask, though, what are the other 2 paradigm shifts that your training is covering?
I'll tell you what, y'all have to go to my website and click on that free training and see it. I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, we're going to listen to that. Little marketing here as well, right? What are some other strategic reasons why the diaspora should be high on our priority list right now?
Yeah, so the second one is that engaging the diaspora is good for the people with least access, those 3 billion, because we know they often have strong family ties back to the homeland. So it stays for 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 generations. And so it's good for them because they get to come to a country where it's open and meet people like us who have the good news of the gospel. And then they're going to translate it back home. And so it's good for them. And then third, it's really good for long-term cross-cultural workers who want to reach unreached people groups, but for example, maybe they're training to go to the nations. And so they can train right here first. We have got to stop sending people overseas who don't know how to share Jesus with people and haven't had some experience. Yeah. And so it's good for them to be able to practice in the diaspora. And then some people, and in my organization, we get kicked out of countries all the time. And so, or they can't get into a country at the moment. And so you can practice outside, learn the language, maybe live in a neighboring country where the diaspora is, learn the language, get in. And then when the country opens up, you can go in. But also if you get kicked out, visas, things like that, you can follow your people. And so I have so many examples of how this has worked. So it's pretty strategic to look at them, I think.
Well, I do think it does seem to be strategic that if you're working overseas, you come back, that you could locate that same people group. I have noticed, though, that there's been 2 attempts that I'm aware of, organized attempts among mission agencies to kind of coordinate, where are the diaspora? Where have our people been working? Now they're returning home. How can we align them? And it doesn't actually seem to happen very often. People tend to move back to where they're from when they relocate back to the U.S. or Canada versus where they could go strategically. Have you seen or experienced any of that same dynamic?
Yes, for sure. And I know in our organization and others, we're trying to figure out how to bridge that, because usually for long-term sending agencies, we don't have a structure for people to keep raising their support or to continue working if they come back to their home country. And we need to create that structure without making it a huge option that people just go there first and stay. So I actually have seen in the past few years, even just personally helping some people relocate back. And one, for example, was working with the Afghans, right? And so they purposely did not come back to the U.S. They went to a neighboring country until they could find where their diaspora was. And that was very helpful because they could continue in their work. And then they relocated to a neighboring country where refugees were pouring into that country, coming across the border. Now they've been there, 3 years and are, having lots of fruit. And then another example, somebody in India who had to return immediately. I was like, hey, Houston welcomes refugees is looking for a director. Why don't you become that director? And so, yeah, he's now the director. And Houston is one of the largest places where we have the most refugees that are resettling. And so he gets to take his experience and salt all of Texas and beyond.
Yeah, there definitely are structural issues. I think about how churches view overseas missionaries versus stateside missionaries, and how they don't necessarily think of a stateside missionary as fundable, so that's a structural issue. I agree with you with organizations, and part of that also I think is in calling. And I've noticed in the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a shift towards saying it's not just about people groups, it's also about places. And I've scratched my head a little bit because it seems like we're working in a world where geography is less important. Yet there's a couple of national names that have been promoting this idea that place is as important as people group. And there's a little bit of pushback on the people group idea because of its, the strong anthropological push that's been there. But certainly I agree with you that there's structural issues that keep people from serving stateside or Canada side when they come back. And we do need to alleviate some of those and figure out how to do better in that space.
Well, I could talk all day about the peoples and place thing, but I will say, I tell people all the time when they're trying to discern their calling of where they're going to serve is let's talk about who you're going to serve first. Talk about who you're going to serve, and then find out where is the most strategic place to reach the who, and don't hang on too tightly to the where because you're probably going to get kicked out and move. And so then you need to follow your who. Mm-hmm. However, I'm also a huge advocate for place combined with peoples. We did that in India with our organization. And we were a big proponent of it because people groups like the Bengalis, Muslim Bengalis, were getting scratched off all the lists because they were supposedly engaged. And there's like 135 million, 150 million Bengali Muslims. And there are places like in southern Bangladesh. I did a survey trip there. There's 8 million, 5 districts. We couldn't find, we found one group of believers, no cross-cultural workers from anyone there. And so that's not on anybody's list. So I want to say Bengali Muslims in southern Bangladesh, we've got to go to those places because it's not going to spread from there, from the north to the south naturally. So yeah, I have a lot to say about that. But
well, I think that's good balance. I'm thinking of a presenter that we had at our annual conference last year that basically painted diaspora ministry as the next era of mission. And, it's going to play a role. I think it's awesome for, like you mentioned, preparation. It's a great way for churches to get face to face with the unreached. But you're also right that the going needs to be, we just got to keep pressing and keep pushing on that. Let me ask you this. In your experience working with diaspora people, are there any significant characteristics or things that you suggest that people be aware of? I think many of us are living in a world where we see people that are diaspora community people all the time. Missiologically, what types of things do you think people need to be aware of?
Well, I like to think of people themselves need to think of themselves as cross-cultural workers, so they need to go into where people are at. We can't also assume that just because people are in our country, that they are like us. They aren't. And the worldviews and mindsets are still with them from, Muslim background, Hindu background. Those mindsets and worldviews are still there. So when I'm teaching just ordinary, regular people to get out of the church pews and into the seats and into the streets, I'm also helping them to learn how to be culturally sensitive, culturally relevant, to shed all of their cultural baggage and go into and learn their worldview. So all the missions things that we teach long-term workers, we actually also need to use when we're with the diaspora. So we can't lay that down and just think they're just like us. And so, and then the other thing is, I know in my world here, people are not wanting to drive an hour to where that's where they need to be. They need to drive the hour. Do you know what I mean? Like, we also have to lay down our busyness and our conveniences in order to go where they are. And so that's a thing. Living with them, that's like, anyone can do that. You could work in the corporate world and live in a refugee community or next to a university. So just being strategic about how you spend your time, where you live, and how you view the people.
I think I'm thinking of something that's happened actually yesterday. My wife did some business in town here. I live in kind of a small suburban town of Orlando. It's not really the suburbs. It's actually like a small town. And she came across an immigrant struggling to do something. And she got home. She's telling me this story. And she's lived cross-culturally, and she remembers the struggle of making the adjustment to a new culture. And, I think that power of having experienced what it's like to be a child when you're in another place has done a lot for building empathy, understanding what people are going through now. And so, I think another good thing to do is be in an area or a space or a place where you truly are the minority and you don't have the skills to work well in that culture. That's what they're living in day to day. And it does help to build empathy. I'm sure some of that comes naturally to you because you were at TCK. But for many Americans, they haven't had that kind of deep cross-cultural exposure.
That's right.
So how about, I'd be curious to know, there's a lot of talk in diaspora ministry about generationally focused mission. In other words, the person coming over as a first-time immigrant has a very different experience than the second and third generation. Does that? I mean, I live in an area where there's a lot of Hispanic immigration. I would guess it's different if you were living in an area where there's a lot of Muslim immigration in terms of how those generational things work. What's your experience in that spot?
Yeah, no matter what country people are coming from, it's the young people that are learning English really fast. They're doing the translations for their parents. That oftentimes the parents don't learn English well enough. I have a friend who used to run he used to have a hotel chain in Iraq. And then when they came here, he's just washing dishes at a Marriott because he can't speak English. But his kids they are pouring into the next generation, of course. They want their kids to have the best education. And, all three of their girls now are in college, but he never really learned how to adjust. Now, I would say the girls then, the young people are struggling with how to honor their parents' heritage and even their Muslim background or whatever background their parents came from, but also live in this very secular world here. So what we can do is we can help them honor their parents. We can include their whole family in whatever we do. And we can also help them to, just like we help our own kids, to navigate and do be, act like the kingdom in the kingdom of God here in this culture. And they appreciate that because a lot of people come, even from people from Latin America, South America, they come from, fairly spiritual
Yeah.
backgrounds. And so they like that. And so that's how we can speak into the young people. And also here, again, time is a huge thing. So young people, especially when we go on our vacations and our holidays and have our Thanksgivings and our Christmases and stuff, if we just include the young people, they'll bring their parents and international students too. Like they want to be with us. They want to have fun with us. They want to have a family. That's really important to them. And so that's practically how we can illustrate the kingdom of God to them in a way that will also help them,
Yeah.
and also help their families.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you for a story in just a minute, a diaspora story that will encourage us. But when you say that, I'm thinking of we're going to have some people over to our house this weekend coming up here, and my son is inviting friends, and his friendship circle is actually mostly Hispanic. And what we've learned is that the invites have just kind of spread from person to person to person, so that people that we don't know are coming to our house, which is fine. But for us Westerners, we like to have the guest list and have a lot of clarity about who's going to be showing up. And we're not going to get that this weekend because it's going to be more of a cross-cultural experience. So those are some of the kinds of things, obviously, we all have to get out. But I would like to kind of close our time out. Could you give us a example of what you'd consider like a mission success story working in this diaspora space?
Sure. I'll do one. I'll do two. One is a really quick one. Just an encouragement to those of you that want to reach out to people. We were buying a car from international students. So they were one from China. There was a Sikh from India, right? Just off of Craigslist. And I asked them, have you ever been in an American home? And they said, oh yeah, we did for Thanksgiving. We rented an Airbnb. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't count. So would you like to come to our home? And so they did that weekend. And actually I asked them right away, have you ever read the Bible with anyone? Because someone had told me I could do that right away. And I thought, Ted, I was like, I got to try this. Cause I used to wait to try to earn the right. They're like, oh yeah, we're here. We want to learn and everything. And so they came that weekend. And like you said, brought all their friends, and we stayed up until midnight. One of them played the guitar. We're playing songs. They zoomed back to their home country for us to meet their parents in China and India. Right. And they wanted to continue studying the Bible. Now, fast forward, that story is unfolding. So here's kind of what I'd say a diaspora success story is. I met my first Muslim when I was 38. And through that relationship opened up dozens of relationships with Iraqis that were about an hour away from me. And I used to spend a day a week. I would time block it off and I would just go down there with my kids and I would just spend all day just being with all those families. And I would come and I would always pray with them and God would just answer things. And so they kind of were like, oh, Jeannie has this connection to God. Like if we just ask God through her, And anyway, so one of my friends, Mariam, calls me one day and she says, my son got beat up on the playground and we came here for safety and I'm so scared. And will you pray for me? Will you pray with me right now? And so I prayed with her. I don't even know what I said. And then I gave her some advice about how to talk to the principal. So she calls me back just an hour later and said, Jeannie, God heard you. He answered your prayers. The principal fixed everything. I didn't even have to talk to him. I feel safe. How do you have this connection to God? How does he hear you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I can tell you, but it's kind of a secret. And it will take 6 times meeting with you in your home. We'll study kind of a bunch of things from your book and my book. And then by the end, you'll know how you can hear God. And you'll be able to have the answer to that. She'll tell me right now. I'm like, nope, got to do it this way. And so she's like, yes, come. So we did that with her family. Her husband was kind of in the background listening, and over time, they got an Injil and a Bible in their language, and, had these relationships. And by the end, she knew that the way to have God hear you is through Jesus Christ, the Messiah, Isa al-Masih. Jesus was the intercessor, and she did not want an intercessor. And so she said, no, I'm going to go straight to him. I don't want it. But her husband, who was listening in the background, read the Gospels and said, I'm in. I want to follow.
Praise the Lord.
And so, yeah, so that story also is it's always it's a long, people who've known and believed things for a long time, it can take some time, and we need to walk with them in this. But yeah, anyone can do this. And, that experience also gave our family experiences and confidence and courage that we could sell everything and leave our well-paying jobs and actually move to an unreached, unengaged Muslim people group halfway a world away. That was before. So God can lead us in all kinds of ways when we just say yes to making one friend and really getting training and learning how to do that. I do that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
All right. Well, the book, if you want to find it, is Across the Street and Around the World, Following Jesus to the Nations in Your Neighborhood and Beyond. And is the neighborsandnations.com website the best way to find out more?
Actually, the best way is to go straight to my Jeannie Marie website. So Jeannie-Marie.com or JeannieMarieAcademy.com. The link, yeah, you'll probably want to.
Yep. We'll have that in the show notes for people.
Edit that out.
I want to thank you for
have it in the show notes for people. Come straight to my website. JeannieMarieAcademy.com is the easiest way. And I have lots of courses on there as well, but the book and lots of free mobilization resources as well to help.
Well, thank you for being with us today. And I trust that you'll get plenty of people to look and see what's going on. And just praise God for your ministry.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Essler, president of Missio Nexus.